I found a document from 1972 in the CIA archive that detailed parapsychology experiments being conducted by the Soviets, and things just went full Ghostbusters. It said, quote, "If one reads the cases and experiments mentioned here, he can make certain deductions. If any of this highly questionable material is true, then it can be inferred that organic matter can be transformed into ectoplasm, that this can be rendered invisible and impalpable, and thus converted into something which, for all practical purposes, amounts to force. If organic matter can be converted into such force matter, it seems reasonable to assume that a physical object, if similarly converted, could travel through space," unquote. Hang on, because things just got weird. If you think this is going to be about some fictional substance that's already been thoroughly debunked, think again. The US was documenting that the Soviets had conducted multiple experiments and case studies which proved that living matter could be transformed into this thing called ectoplasm, which could be converted into some kind of force that would transcend space itself. What the heck? I had to know if there was more to this, of course. So I started researching ectoplasm, and let me tell you, it was just the tip of the iceberg. I realized it was a part of a bigger, horrifying story of a real-life Dr. Frankenstein, an American aviation hero, the search for immortality, organ transplantation, eugenics, and the spiritualist movement. I gotta say, I was not expecting to find any of this on a random Tuesday. But hey, when you have a show called Metaphysical, sometimes the weird finds you. Join me, Rob Counts, for a show that's out of this world. And a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the Metaphysical channel to make sure you don't miss out on any updates or content drops. All your support lets us keep making this awesome content, so thanks a lot for watching. From the 1840s to 1920s, the spiritualist movement took off in the United States. People were really interested in whether they could communicate with spirits of the beyond, and they would have paranormal parties where they held seances with people claiming to be mediums. Honestly, we don't know what these parties were called. Seance soirees, ghost galas, phantom festivities, wraith raves, mystical medium event thingies.
I see dead people.
All you have to know is they were meeting together to try to contact the dead. But these weren't just early versions of hippies or uneducated, superstitious folks trying out spiritualism. Elites of society, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the dude who wrote Sherlock Holmes, and occultists like Helena Blavatsky, were popularizing the movement. Some think that the casualties from the Civil War and later World War I helped interest grow in spiritualism as desperate people looked for ways to contact their dead loved ones. Abraham Lincoln's wife even had seances at the White House after she lost her son. But whatever the cause, a fad was created. Have you ever seen a photo of ectoplasm? Spiritual photographs took off around this time, where these mediums claimed they'd capture the images of this elusive, gauzy substance of ectoplasm around them, or even images of ectoplasmic beings. Yeah, this is where Ghostbusters got the concept of ghost leaking goop and all of that stuff, slime, all of that.
Bankman, get a sample of this.
Somebody blows their nose and you want to keep it?
I'd like to analyze it.
Most of these ectoplasm pictures were proven to be frauds. I mean, just look at them. These charlatans used cheesecloth dolls or other photos to fake that they'd captured entities on camera, and honestly, it just looks ridiculous. But what's interesting is that while the public show-offs were pretending to capture a strange force on camera film, real researchers were actually doing it behind the scenes, believe it or not. Yeah, in the late 1930s, a Soviet scientist named Semyon Kirlian invented what became known as Kirlian photography, or electrography. Basically, he figured out how to capture the image of an aura, or energy on camera. This electrical discharge could be seen on all sorts of objects, plants, leaves, and even people. And unlike the staged spiritualist photos, this was real. Studying luminous bodies was something the Soviets began taking very seriously. Why? Because not only was photography proving there was something real and intangible, but at the same time, some of the world's most eminent scientists from the late 1800s and early 1900s claimed to have witnessed real apport phenomena, astral projection, and beings appearing in light. I think that to them, the spiritualist movement was basically a silly parlor game the public played and fooled each other with, where they claimed that something appeared out of nowhere or they'd communicated with entities. But the real data, where this so-called apport phenomena was really happening, was being gathered secretly or not publicized. The CIA documented that the British chemist and physicist Sir William Crookes, who discovered the element thallium, The British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, who'd co-created the theory of evolution with Charles Darwin and others, had witnessed abhorrent phenomena. Crook said, quote, "I have more than once seen, first an object move, then a luminous cloud appear to form about it, and lastly, the cloud condense into shape and become a perfectly formed hand. I retained one of these hands in my own, firmly resolved not to let it escape. There was no struggle or effort made to get loose, but it gradually seemed to resolve itself into vapor and faded in that manner from my grasp," unquote. That's pretty nuts. Whether this particular event was true or not, the US military believed the Soviets were considering the possibilities. If a hand could really appear out of nowhere and firmly grab someone, like was being reported, that may have first-rate military applications. I mean, can you believe that? And if you could control these luminous clouds, then these ethereal bodies could potentially travel unlimited distances, pass through solid material like walls, be used to cause instant death in military and civilian officials, or disable military communications and equipment. I mean, just think about all of the uses of this. I mean, having the thing from the Addams family do whatever you wanted in this dimension, crazy stuff. Controlling the luminous cloud would be controlling ectoplasm, which would be controlling some kind of force matter that could travel through space. All these possibilities were noted in the Defense Intelligence Agency's report decades later in 1972. Imagine that, ectoplasm as a weapon, and it was potentially real. Of course, this kind of ethereal body research was definitely not limited to just photography and ghostly murder weapons, though. If you could really transform the human body, like turning living matter into a controllable ectoplasm that could transcend space, then could you also transform and control the body in other ways? My research next led me a step in another direction, from ectoplasm and into the bizarre, ancient, and even surprisingly modern world of real alchemy. A newspaper in 1922 asked, "And death? Does it release the ectoplasm?" This has not been established. What seems established is that ectoplasm is a substance separate and apart in its nature from the physical, yet supposedly a product of the latter, a product of the material elements. If the scientist who can mix the substances of an egg into form and arrangement could instill or cause to occur ectoplasm within the artificial egg, would they have produced life? Time and further research will tell. So if that paragraph was confusing to you, I'm going to explain it. Scientists thought there was some substance, a force, that created life, and they thought it was this ectoplasm. If you drew out enough ectoplasm from someone, would the person die? If you added ectoplasm to an object, like they apparently tried with an egg, would you give it life? These were the questions they were asking. But my question is, why were they asking that in the first place? Well, for some of the richest and most powerful men in the world, they discovered that you don't get to take wealth with you when you die, and you're only on this planet for a short time. So they wanted to figure out how to live forever. Hey, don't we all? But instead of transforming themselves into better human beings and taking a truly spiritual route to do that, they took a scientific one, wanting to transform their bodies like machine parts. But when you're that desperate to live forever, what do you start compromising on to reach that? Here's where the mad scientist experiments come in. In the 1910s, scientists at the Rockefeller Institute tested if they could keep alive a piece of a chicken embryo's heart. As a matter of fact, 10 years later, it was reported that it was still alive. It grew so rapidly that 2/3 of it had to be cut away every 2 days. The newspaper said, quote, "Nobody knows how long this bit of tissue, not even a complete heart, will keep alive if fed and held at the normal chicken temperature of 103 degrees. This tiny bit of tissue contains life, whatever life is," unquote. The heart tissue had been removed from the rest of the circulatory system, so that should have meant death. Why was it still alive? The paper went on, quote, "Since Dr. Carrel has been careful to substitute these necessary services, the tissue has blithely gone on living. Will it live as long as it's supplied? Does it contain ectoplasm? And is the ectoplasm it may contain indestructible? Will the ectoplasm abide in the tissue as long as the tissue is kept healthy, supplying life animation in turn for the physical home upon which the ectoplasm itself lives?" So the Rockefeller Institute, named after one of the wealthiest men in history, I might remind you, with the help of this Dr. Carrel, was keeping a chicken heart alive perpetually, and the cells replaced themselves over and over, increasing at a rate of 66% per day. Who the heck was this Dr. Carell? Dr. Frankenstein had nothing on this guy. Dr. Alexis Carrel was a renowned French surgeon who'd come to the United States. He was also a eugenicist, possibly psychotic spiritualist, but more on that in a minute. Let me jump back and tell you what this guy was really up to. Dr. Carell's work was in transplantation of blood vessels and organs, vascular sutures and tissue cultures, and he became an expert at treating wounds. But something completely turned this scientist's life upside down. In the early 1900s, he witnessed several miracle healings in France, including a dying woman who he watched with his own eyes completely recover with no logical explanation, and that opened him up to the idea that the supernatural had to be real. Publicly, this man was a huge success as a surgeon. In fact, Nobel Prizes for the development of surgical procedures are pretty rare, but Dr. Alexis Carrel got one in 1912 in recognition of his work on the vascular suture and transplantation of blood vessels and organs. Why am I telling you all of this? That reputation got the attention of someone pretty famous, the aviator Charles Lindbergh. Weirdly, this American hero who'd made the first solo nonstop flight from New York to Paris and was Time Magazine's first Man of the Year ever, by the way, and this renowned surgeon with an interest in the supernatural became really good buddies in the 1930s. And Lindbergh somehow got involved in his research. What were they up to? I mean, this is super strange, right? When I looked into what they were doing, I found the weirdest story I could possibly ever come across. First, get this. Lindbergh was open to otherworldly experiences too. During his famous transatlantic flight, he reportedly saw inhabitants of a universe closed to mortal men moving around his aircraft, some of whom he believed had spoken to him. Yeah, he said that. But he'd reached out to Carrel not because of their shared interest in weird things. At that point, they might not even known that they both liked weird things, but because his sister-in-law had very serious heart valve damage, and he wondered if it could be repaired. Lindbergh, being a mechanical man, started building new equipment for Carrel, and together they created the perfusion pump, which was instrumental in developing organ transplantation and open heart surgery. So these guys were basically the pioneers of organ transplants. Yeah. What? Dr. Carrel wasn't just studying this kind of surgical stuff we see as normal today. He was also interested in whether organs could be removed from the body, repaired, and then, of course, reinserted. I mean, could people be repaired like machines and live forever too? That's the next logical question you'd ask. Carrel and Lindbergh conducted pretty unethical experiments on animals in Carrel's lab, like bleeding cats to death and keeping thousands of rodents in a mousery together, which often caused the mice to fight to death. Yeah, that kind of experiment. The Daily Mail reported that the winner rodents were given females to impregnate and the losers were given autopsies. The aim was to see whether this contributed to the creation of heroic mice that were resistant to disease and would live longer. Carrel said, quote, "If I could do the same tests on humans, I might produce a man who could jump 20 feet in the air and live to be 200, unquote. Sounds like a super soldier."
I understood that reference.
And we've arrived at eugenics. Carrel spoke to newspapers about wanting to build a superior human race, as well as discussing human beings who were of poor quality and weaklings who contributed to the enfeeblement of the white races. That guy said that. Lindbergh seemed to agree with Carrel's ideology and to even admire the Nazis who gave him a medal when he visited Germany. This is all going on at this time. But in 1932, this bizarre partnership should have been interrupted because Charles Lindbergh was a little distracted as his 20-month-old son, Charles Jr., was allegedly kidnapped. A ransom note was found on the windowsill demanding first $50,000, then a second note demanding $70,000. Although they tried to find him and negotiate with this mystery kidnapper, 2 months after the kidnapping, the boy's body was found decomposing. So this was a huge mystery, as you can imagine. I mean, was the body there the whole time since the kidnapping and the money wouldn't have returned a living child? The Lindbergh baby's story became infamous. This crime of the century prompted Congress to make kidnapping a federal crime if the kidnapper crossed state lines with the victim. Papers speculated that Charles himself was somehow involved, and this really damaged his reputation. Suddenly, the American hero might be involved in a conspiracy. Sounds pretty convenient. In 1935, a man was finally accused of the abduction and murder of the boy. Lindbergh did attend every day of the trial, but this is weird. He returned right to Carell's lab as soon as the accused was found guilty. What was he so desperate to work on when his family had fallen apart? Well, it was a perfusion chamber which would keep cells alive and in a healthy state. I mean, I can understand a grieving father obsessed with immortality thinks maybe he can build machines that will keep cells alive forever, but this stuff got a little sick. The men removed the thyroid of a cat, put it in Lindbergh's perfusion chamber, and it was still alive and functioning 18 days later. They extended the experiments into other animals next, and even the entire limb of a miscarried human baby. Yeah. So let's recap. A mechanical genius and a mad scientist team up. They both believe organs can be healed and that superhumans can be created, and they start to prove it. But they want to limit that knowledge only to a select few who are worthy in their eyes, and this whole time, Carell is being funded by the wealthy and powerful Rockefeller Institute. The Daily Mail said that Carell and Lindbergh corresponded with various state mental hospitals too. So were they looking for live human test victims who couldn't say no? Daily Mail also reported that Carell thought an all-black environment was more hygienic. So he and Lindbergh wore flowing black robes when they drained the cat of its blood. What is this, a ritual? Now, I can't tell whether that part is true or just sensationalism because their experiments were so freaky, but we do know both men were interested in the esoteric world. So were they trying to crack the code of life force itself? Did they manage to move a step closer to immortality? We do know Carell is the father of transplant technology. We do know that there are lots of wealthy individuals and powerful companies privately funding research into life extension technology and healthcare so they can live forever. So whatever the case today, organ transplantation was originally based on the occult, a supernatural agenda. Let me ask you this. What would happen if we found out there was an intangible, photographable substance or life force, even if that thing weren't really ectoplasm? I'd say that's pretty much what religious believers and spiritual people throughout the ages have thought about the soul. That too can be transformed into something better and better, right? That's why monks, nuns, and meditators worked so hard on improving their minds and bodies over the ages. When we hear the term alchemy today, we think of turning metal into gold with the Philosopher's Stone or making potions and doing witchcraft. But techniques for internal alchemy have existed for thousands of years too. That's when you hear incredible stories of superpowers and living for an unusually long time. I found a report that Lindbergh moved his family to Britain and continued his work there, this time investigating claims of Himalayan yogis who had extended their lives by decades. He initially thought it was because of their breath control, so he subjected guinea pigs and mice to different levels of carbon dioxide. But then things for him changed again. Carell passed away, and Lindbergh was sent to Germany to recruit scientists at the end of the war. Sounds like Project Paperclip. The US wanted to get them to share their research. Lindbergh visited a concentration camp during the trip, and it shocked him because the smell was one he recognized. It was the same death smell as the mousery he and Carell had run, where rodents fought each other to the death as the strong were rewarded and the weak were eliminated. I mean, think about the repercussions of this. This had a profound effect on Lindbergh, who started thinking his and Carell's pursuit of immortality had been off. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and he saw that destruction too, he wrote, quote, "This put man in the position of having challenged God." Maybe he and Carell had done the same. Get this, Lindbergh started campaigning for peace and protecting the environment after that. Lindbergh never apparently figured out how the yogis really extended their lives. He and Dr. Carell just helped push science forward and got their photos in some magazines. My question is, if the Americans and the Soviets were both studying this ectoplasm phenomena, the amazing abilities of the human body and living forever, then what did they find that we don't know about? My bet is that Dr. Frankenstein, Dr. Carell, was just the tip of the iceberg. I'll leave you with this one last weird bit of information in this topic of alchemy and immortality. In the late 1800s, up through the 20s, the American spiritualist movement was taking off. In the 20s up to the 70s, Soviet parapsychology research into superpowers like telepathy secretly skyrocketed. In the 1930s and 40s, the Nazis went on extensive quests to find the Holy Grail and figure out how people like monks had obtained superpowers. Plus, they were campaigning for eugenics and experimenting on prisoners to find the limits of the human body. I talked more about that in my episode on out-of-body experiences. And all around the world, what had once been an internal method of transformation as people pursued immortality through religion or spirituality became an external hunt, where the nations competed with each other to exploit the human body, tinker with it, and allow the powerful to live forever. Well, you guys might be asking, well, Rob, what do you think? Well, actually, I want to know what you think. This was a crazy dig, and we haven't even gotten to the bottom of this. So if you could, please leave a comment below and let me know what you think. But as for me, I think that the elites can try to use advanced technology or consult who they think are energy experts all they want in order to try to live forever. And maybe it will extend your life to a bit to become part robot or do a weird ritual where you sell your soul. I did an episode on men who did that too. But these scientists and people funding immortality research are missing a huge piece, which is that everyone has this life force energy they're trying to understand. They think consciousness and the mind are solvable, but maybe mind and matter are one and the same. Maybe ectoplasm is real after all. But what do you think? Have you found more research on ectoplasm or mad scientist experiments I should know about? I'd like to know about them. Do you think this is real? Let me know in the comments. If you like this episode and want more, please consider supporting my work by pledging on our website, themetaphysical.tv. With your help, I can make more videos, more merch, which I design myself, and also more exclusive episodes on awesome topics like this. A special director's cut of Tesla made a death ray and the government stole it, Olmec mysteries, what really happened to scientists who dared to talk about anti-gravity, and proof of Vimanas. You can also access all of those at themetaphysical.tv. You can also get a bag of delicious metaphysical coffee every month if you want your mornings to be interstellar. You just have to subscribe to the Metaphysical Coffee tier. Remember to like and subscribe to help the channel grow as well. And if you want to hear longer conversational episodes right on YouTube, our Metaphysical podcast has you covered. With that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world, ectoplasmic.